There comes a moment in life when you realize that becoming unforgettable is not about loud declarations or dramatic exits. It's about who you are when no one is watching. It's about the quiet strength you carry, the choices you make in stillness, and the principles you refuse to abandon. Stoicism doesn't teach you to seek revenge or validation. It teaches you to rise in such a way that those who once overlooked you are forced to look back, because you earned respect. People regret losing those who are rare, and in this world, rarity isn't defined by looks or possessions. It's defined by composure under pressure, integrity under temptation, grace in adversity. The Stoics were not concerned with status, they were concerned with character. They believed that power is found not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. That is how you become unforgettable. That is how you become the one they regret letting go. This is not about making others feel your absence out of bitterness. It's about making your presence so powerful, so composed, so consistent in virtue, that it becomes impossible to replace. Let us walk together through the 7 Stoic paths that lead to this kind of strength. Chapter 1. Hold the line. Discipline over drama. The Stoics taught that you cannot control what others do, but you can control how you show up, especially when emotions flare and circumstances shake. When tension rises and tempers boil, when betrayal stings or expectations collapse, the Stoic remains composed. The one they regret is not the one who shouted louder or manipulated outcomes. It's not the one who played games or sought pity. It's the one who remained grounded, anchored in values while others lost themselves in noise. Discipline is the backbone of that kind of strength. It isn't a set of rules written in a journal or a list of daily habits meant for public display. It is something deeper, something invisible but undeniable. Discipline is the refusal to let your emotions govern your ethics. It is the quiet resistance to chaos when everything in you wants to react. It is about honoring your standards when no one else is watching, when it would be easier to lower the bar. This form of discipline is forged in the fire of inconvenience. It is tested in discomfort. To be disciplined is to choose what is right over what is easy, to stand still when everyone else is moving with the crowd. When you are disciplined in thought, you filter your assumptions before they distort your clarity. You don't spiral into worst-case scenarios. When you are disciplined in words, you don't weaponize silence or sarcasm. You choose speech that reflects restraint, not reactivity. And when you are disciplined in action, you stop waiting for the world to notice. You act because it is your duty, not because it earns you praise. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. This wasn't some hollow idealism. It was a tactical reminder, because in chaos, most people default to survival mode. They protect their pride, their ego, their sense of being right. But the Stoic knows that strength isn't in being right, it's in being righteous. It's in holding yourself to a higher standard, even when no one would blame you for crumbling. That is what sets you apart. Not just endurance, but deliberate composure. People forget what you wore. They forget the words you spoke in defense. But they never forget the calm. They never forget the steady presence who didn't break when the pressure was highest. They remember the one who maintained dignity when others chose chaos. That memory lingers longer than any reaction could. It becomes a benchmark, a reminder that they once stood beside someone who refused to be consumed by the storm. To begin this journey of discipline, don't wait for the perfect morning routine or the ideal motivation. Those things fade. What lasts is the muscle you build from keeping promises to yourself. Begin with one small commitment, a task so simple and clear that there's no excuse to break it. Whether it's daily push-ups, sitting still with your thoughts for 10 minutes, journaling a reflection, or planning your day before you sleep. Choose it, own it, protect it. Then honor it. No matter how tired you are, no matter how much resistance your mind presents, no matter how loud your excuses become. This is where discipline takes root, not when it's convenient, but when it isn't. Discipline grows in the soil of discomfort. It takes root every time you override impulse with principle. This small commitment is not trivial. It is the first brick in the foundation of who you are becoming. As you stack more of these moments, you become reliable to yourself. You become someone you trust. You will feel the friction of repetition, and at times it may feel dull. But do not mistake simplicity for insignificance. That daily repetition is sculpting something rare, someone who does not depend on adrenaline or applause to act with excellence. You will feel the weight of consistency, and there will be days it feels unfair, exhausting, unappreciated. But that weight is not a burden. It is a sculptor. It is chiseling away the hesitation, the self-pity, the emotional noise. Each time you show up despite resistance, you reinforce a new identity. And what remains, after enough days of holding the line, is a version of you that doesn't sway in storms. A version of you that can be counted on in a crisis, relied upon in uncertainty. A version of you that others will remember not because you shouted or chased, but because you stood still in your strength when everything else was shaking. And in time, they will realize they lost someone unrepeatable. Chapter 2. Let them talk. Be unshakable in reputation. A reputation can be shattered by rumor, but character cannot. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus warned, "If you are ever tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your integrity. If you need a witness, be your own." These words aren't just moral encouragement, they are a shield, a reminder that the only approval that truly matters is the one rooted in your conscience. Because the court of public opinion is unstable. One moment they celebrate you, the next they tear you down. If you anchor your peace in their praise, you will drown in their judgment. The world can distort your image, but it cannot touch your essence unless you let it. When people part ways, by choice, by betrayal, by misunderstanding, they often rewrite the narrative to soothe their ego. They highlight your flaws and erase your efforts. They may mock your silence or question your intentions, not always from cruelty, but from discomfort. It's easier for them to paint you as the problem than to face their own reflection. And yet, the one they regret is not the one who fought for vindication, not the one who begged to be seen clearly. It's the one who didn't need to be seen at all, the one who walked away, not to escape, but because they had nothing left to prove. There is profound strength in choosing not to explain yourself, especially when everything in you wants to scream, "That's not who I am." There's a discipline in letting the lie echo without chasing it down. When your name is twisted and your motives questioned, staying still feels like injustice. But the Stoics understood that silence can be a sword sharper than any defense. Let your stillness speak. Let your composure contradict their assumptions. Let your life, lived fully, clearly, honestly, be the only statement you make. Keep building, keep moving, keep becoming. Let your consistency dismantle their claims over time. Rumors fade, facts remain. Truth has a patience that gossip never survives. And eventually, the fog they tried to wrap around your reputation clears, and what's left standing is not their version of you, but your own unshaken presence. Your foundation becomes visible through your conduct. Your values speak without your needing to speak. To be unbothered by falsehood is not weakness. It's proof that you are anchored somewhere deeper than approval. It's evidence that you belong to a different order, a higher discipline. You don't need to attend every fire set in your name. Some fires burn themselves out when you refuse to fan them, and others reveal their own origin when they collapse without fuel. Refusing to feed them is not avoidance, it is strategy. To be wrongly judged and still walk in peace is one of the rarest forms of self-mastery. It is a spiritual strength, a mental clarity, and a commitment to sovereignty. The world teaches us to fight for our narrative, to respond, to clarify, to correct, to clap back, to control the public version of ourselves as if perception is the currency of peace. But the Stoics teach us something harder, to release that burden, to understand that some people will never know you accurately, not because you failed to show them, but because they lacked the clarity or willingness or humility to see. And your energy is not meant to serve their perception. Your job is not to educate their opinion of you. Your job is to stay aligned with the truth inside you. That is where peace lives. Every time you resist the temptation to retaliate, to explain, to justify, to prove, you feed the part of you that knows its own worth. You become rooted, not reactive. You don't twist yourself into a version someone else can understand. You stay whole, and the longer you remain whole, the more powerful your stillness becomes. You develop a peace that doesn't swing with others' opinions. You stop being pulled by the shifting tides of emotion and gossip. You live with a quiet but unmistakable dignity that unsettles those who tried to bring you down. Not because you are trying to make a statement, but because your life becomes one. They cannot understand how you moved on without a need for vindication. It confuses them, because most people crave acknowledgement. But you walked away, not in defeat, but in conviction. And that mystery, that power, that absence of explanation is what stays with them. It echoes, it questions their certainty. It becomes the silence they can't explain. They remember you not as the one who shouted, but as the one who rose, not as the one who fought for recognition, but as the one who made their absence felt through calm and growth. The one who outgrew the rumor, the gossip, the narrative. The one who didn't need to be seen to be known. You didn't need to correct their version of the story because you were too busy writing your own. That kind of poise can't be forgotten. It lingers in the background of their memory. It doesn't beg to return. It simply becomes the standard they struggle to find again. And in time, it haunts the silence they chose when they had the chance to know someone real. Chapter 3. Build in silence. Create a life that speaks. One of the most stoic things you can do after someone underestimates you or lets you go is to build a life so rich in integrity, depth, and alignment that no explanation is necessary. Not a single rebuttal, not a single defensive word, just presence, just quiet power, just the steady accumulation of strength and virtue lived out in full view of the world, but never for the world. Seneca once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." That sentence is not a suggestion, it's a summons, a call to shift from performance to embodiment. He wasn't telling you to persuade others of your value. He was calling you to become it, so completely, so obviously, so consistently that the evidence silences every doubt. To live this way is to embrace the Stoic idea that reality is shaped not by what happens, but by how we respond. And the response the world often least expects, the one they rarely see coming, is silent excellence. It is not loud, it does not posture, it does not fight for attention, it just is. And in a time where most people seek validation by making noise, silence becomes a radical act of self-trust. You don't tell them you're growing, you just grow. You don't show them what they missed, you just become it. Rejection stings. It does. It cuts not only because of the separation, but because it stirs our deepest insecurities. It whispers lies. You're not enough. You were replaceable. You didn't matter. And in that pain, the instinct to prove ourselves rises fast. We want to be seen. We want to be missed. We want to show them they were wrong. But proving is always theatrical. It demands a stage, an audience, and applause, and in chasing that, we lose our grounding. But building is different. It's quiet, it's sacred. It's done when no one is clapping, when no one is watching. It happens at 5 a.m. when you choose discipline over sleep. It happens in the gym, in your journal, at your desk, in your studies, when you return to yourself again and again, sculpting the next version of who you are without needing a single witness. It is not fueled by spite, but by self-respect, not by anger, but by purpose. And over time, it becomes undeniable, because what starts in the dark eventually steps into the light, not with fireworks, but with presence, with impact, with gravity. People begin to feel your growth before they hear about it. You walk differently, you speak differently, you move with purpose, not permission, and the very life you've built becomes your proof of worth, of resilience, of identity. Silence, when it's filled with intention, becomes louder than words. When you stay focused on the process, the outcome speaks for itself. The world does not respect volume, it respects results. And the ones who doubted you? They don't regret what you said after they left. They regret what you became without them. They regret losing someone who did not crumble when overlooked, but who became impossible to overlook by doing the work in peace. Your life becomes your rebuttal, not your anger, not your explanations, just your progress. Every time you choose structure over chaos, clarity over confusion, action over distraction, you create a legacy. You stop being someone looking for closure and start becoming someone who is the closure. You carry such internal alignment that you no longer need an apology or validation to move forward. You've become too whole to wait for pieces. The Stoic stops looking behind them and starts looking within. They stop writing responses in their heads and start writing the next chapter of their lives. They understand that revenge is noisy, but growth is surgical, clean, focused, precise. Each day of consistent action adds another layer of quiet strength. Each small win compounds, and over time they build something so stable that it cannot be shaken by the opinions that once rocked them. Closure is no longer about final conversations. It's about a final commitment to yourself. It's about saying, I will no longer abandon my growth just because someone else abandoned me. It's not a one-time event. It's a lifestyle. It's found in how you eat, how you move, how you think, how you speak to yourself. It's built in the routines you honor, the boundaries you set, the people you no longer pursue. And with time, you stop needing people to recognize your worth, because your peace recognizes it, your discipline reflects it, your direction confirms it, and those who let you go, they are not haunted by your pleas. They are haunted by your progress, because nothing leaves a deeper impression than the person who didn't break, didn't broadcast, didn't beg, but who simply became. Rebuilding, to the Stoic, is not an act of spite, it is an act of sacred repair, not to show anyone, but to honor the self. You wake up early not to impress anyone, but because you value your time. You train not to show off, but because your body is a temple. You read not to seem smart, but because wisdom is your compass. And when people try to re-enter your life, they realize they're not just visiting the past. They're standing in front of someone they don't even recognize anymore, because that version of you no longer exists. Let your life speak so clearly, so consistently, and so completely that it doesn't just end conversations, it prevents the need for them altogether. Let it be a lighthouse of quiet clarity, radiating from your routines, your character, your presence. You don't need to post about your glow-up. You are the glow-up, etched into the way you walk, the boundaries you enforce, and the peace that follows you like a shadow. You don't have to explain how much better off you are. Your alignment does it for you. Your stillness becomes magnetic. Your self-trust becomes a signal. You're not chasing closure anymore. You've chosen composure, and through that choice, you've invited elevation. And slowly, silently, then all at once, the world begins to take notice. Quietly, reluctantly, and eventually, unavoidably. Build your life so thoroughly, so unapologetically, so deeply aligned with who you are becoming, that looking back isn't just unnecessary, it's unimaginable. Not because you're bitter, not because you're avoiding the past, but because you've transcended the need to dwell in old chapters when you've become the author of a whole new book. When your days are too full of purpose to waste time in regret. When your momentum is so focused, your inner world so cultivated, that even those who once defined you wouldn't know how to approach the person you've become. You've moved into a frequency they can't reach, not out of pride, but out of growth. That is Stoic power, not emotional revenge disguised as righteousness, not veiled bitterness dressed up as strength, but the steady, invisible discipline of doing what's right, even when it's thankless. The deliberate, practiced restraint of becoming someone who doesn't shout their worth, but embodies it with every action. The quiet revolution of daily refinement, of trading spectacle for significance, of sacrificing recognition for resilience, and in time, without needing to campaign or convince, your name won't echo because of how you left. It will echo because of how you rose, not in a blaze of emotion, but in a quiet blaze of evolution. They won't just regret what they lost. They'll come to terms with what they'll never be close to again. Chapter 4. Become emotionally sovereign. Master your reactions. In relationships and breakups, romantic, platonic, or professional, what people often regret is not losing the loudest voice, the most dramatic exit, or the one who made the biggest scene. It's losing the person who was emotionally mature, the one who could have screamed, but didn't, the one who had every reason to retaliate, but chose grace instead, the one who didn't react out of ego, didn't weaponize silence, didn't dramatize pain, but instead felt deeply and responded with calm wisdom and restraint. The Stoics did not deny emotion. They studied it. They welcomed it not as a flaw, but as a force to be trained. Emotions were not seen as problems to suppress or avoid. They were messengers. They were internal signals that pointed to what mattered. Anger often revealed a perceived injustice. Grief revealed loss. Fear revealed uncertainty. But these feelings were never meant to be captains of the ship. They were advisors, not dictators. A Stoic doesn't ask, "How can I avoid feeling this?" They ask, "What does this emotion mean?" And then, more importantly, what is in my control right now? That question is the fulcrum, the lever that lifts you out of reactivity and into power. When you can stop and ask that, when you can breathe, reflect, and move deliberately, you are no longer a slave to circumstance. You are a sovereign over your own soul. The pause is where everything changes. That breath between feeling and reaction, that's your kingdom. That's the space where discipline is born. It's the moment where you choose not to send the angry text, not to escalate the argument, not to speak just to wound. That space is not passive, it is powerful. It's a battleground, and every time you hold the line there, you win. That breath is what separates wisdom from impulse. It's what allows you to suffer without turning suffering into self-destruction. When someone walks away from a person who doesn't spiral, who doesn't cling, who doesn't chase, who doesn't turn bitter or cruel, they often don't realize what they had. Because most people, when things fall apart with them. They confuse feeling with acting. They collapse into the emotion rather than carry it with awareness. But the rare ones, the Stoic ones, stand tall in the rubble, not because they don't feel the loss, but because they've trained for the storm. Their foundation wasn't built in sunshine, it was forged in struggle. Emotional sovereignty is the highest form of self-respect. It is the discipline of protecting your peace even when everything around you invites chaos. It means that your mind is not hijacked by another person's decisions. It means you don't need to lash out to feel powerful. You don't need to punish with distance or silence to feel seen. You don't shapeshift into a smaller version of yourself to avoid abandonment. You feel what you feel. You let it move through you, and you hold your ground. To build this strength, begin by noticing the stories your emotions tell you. Practice naming your emotions out loud. This is sadness. This is anger. This is fear. But don't let those emotions rename you. You are not sadness. You are someone feeling sadness. You are not broken. You are someone healing. That simple act of language, of shifting from identity to awareness, creates space. And in that space, you are free. This separation does not make you numb. It makes you precise. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. You feel more, not less. You love better, not worse. Because you are no longer living in reaction. You are no longer ruled by the pull of the moment. You are anchored, centered, present. You become the person who diffuses conflict instead of feeding it, who brings reason to chaos, who holds space when others collapse. And that kind of presence cannot be faked. People remember the calm ones because they made everything around them quieter. They remember the ones who didn't burn bridges, who didn't need revenge, who didn't beg to be understood. They remember the ones who carried themselves with such clarity that their absence felt louder than their presence ever did. They remember the ones who didn't just love with depth, but who knew how to walk away with dignity when love was no longer mutual. Emotional maturity is so rare in a world addicted to attention that its absence becomes deafening. In a culture that rewards reaction over reflection and drama over dignity, it is increasingly uncommon to encounter someone who knows how to sit with discomfort without making others bleed from it. And the moment someone loses a person who mastered their emotions, not perfectly, but consistently through deliberate effort, that loss lingers. It haunts, not loudly, but quietly and persistently. Because once someone has experienced the peace of being in the presence of someone emotionally composed, chaotic replacements feel exhausting. They know they will struggle to find that kind of composure again because it's not easy to find, because it can't be performed, purchased, or imitated. It doesn't come in the form of grand gestures or charming distractions. It must be cultivated over time through solitude, study, patience, and countless moments of choosing virtue over impulse. It's forged in the silence after the argument, in the stillness of the night when the mind wants to spiral. The emotionally grounded person is not born. They are refined in the fire of restraint, shaped by their ability to stay calm when it would have been easier to erupt. The emotionally sovereign are unforgettable because they live aligned with truth, virtue, and discipline. Their presence speaks when their mouths don't. Their calm interrupts chaos. Their words, when spoken, are considered firm and rooted in clarity, not in the need to prove a point. Their impact doesn't rely on theatrics. It lives in how they made others feel seen without manipulation, how they stayed rooted when others scattered, how they responded with awareness when they could have reacted from ego. They walk into a room and immediately alter its temperature. Their steadiness slows things down. They leave a conversation and leave others thinking. They elevate not by force, but by example. They teach without preaching. They lead without controlling. They make emotional maturity look effortless, but only because they've labored in private for years to get there. They're the ones you remember when things fall apart, because they're the ones who never needed the spotlight to shine. In a world of reaction, they are reflection. They mirror what we could be if we chose our responses more deliberately. They force you to examine yourself, not through critique, but through contrast. You notice what's missing in others only after experiencing someone who carried themselves with stillness and power. In a world of noise, they are stillness, a rare silence that speaks with more weight than volume ever could. Their lack of drama does not make them dull, it makes them magnetic. Their absence becomes louder than the presence of those who tried so hard to be noticed. And in a world that teaches us to explode, to externalize, to dramatize every injury and emotion, they remind us that the strongest power is often the one that never has to. Their self-control is not suppression, it is structure. It is freedom from being tossed around by every emotional wave. They are not remembered for the storm they caused, but for the peace they maintained. They become the ones whose absence is felt not just in words, but in energy. And that peace becomes a standard that others will seek and often fail to find again. Not because it is mythical, but because it is rare, because it takes work, because it is not learned in a day. But once encountered, it becomes the measure by which all future encounters are judged. And that, more than anything, is why they are the ones others regret letting go. Chapter 5. Let go with grace. Release without bitterness. Regret is not always about losing someone who fought to stay. It's often about losing someone who left with dignity, not with rage, not with drama, not with ultimatums, but with quiet clarity, with peace in their step and principle in their posture. The Stoic does not beg, they do not chase, they do not contort themselves for validation or shrink to be accepted. They do not perform to earn place in someone else's story. They know what is meant to stay will choose to, what does not choose to was never meant to, and what is not meant for you should never be forced to remain. To live this way is not easy. It requires deep courage, the kind of courage that isn't loud but disciplined. It takes strength to detach with grace instead of desperation. It demands self-respect that exceeds the need to be heard, seen, or understood by those who cannot understand you. When emotions are raw and rejection feels personal, it is tempting to make a scene, to beg for answers, to fall into the cycle of seeking validation. But the Stoic holds the line. They hold their form, not out of pride, but out of alignment with a deeper truth, that we are only responsible for what is within our control, and dignity is always within our control. Epictetus reminded us that peace begins the moment we accept what we cannot control and focus entirely on what we can. Who stays, who leaves, who offers us clarity or confusion, these are beyond us. But how we respond, that belongs to us completely. That is our battlefield. That is where self-mastery is tested and proven. That is where true character is revealed, not when we are chosen, but when we are left. Not when we are loved, but when we are let go. Letting go with grace doesn't mean you didn't care. It doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It means you cared enough to preserve your center when everything around you pulled at your edges. It means you loved honestly, but not blindly. It means you were open, but not unguarded. And when the time came, when the respect began to erode, or the silence became louder than any words, you didn't protest your worth. You didn't rehearse your pain. You didn't perform your suffering. You stepped back, not to disappear, but to return to yourself. You didn't beg for closure because you realized that closure is not something another person grants you. It is something you grant yourself through acceptance and action. You didn't write long messages hoping they'd understand. You didn't wait around hoping for clarity that never came. You didn't allow their silence to echo louder than your own intuition. Instead, you turned inward. You grew. You poured the pain into the soil of your discipline, and you watered it with wisdom. And when someone walks away and you respond not with rage, but with restraint, when you respond not with guilt, but with groundedness, you become unforgettable. You become the rare kind of soul who exits not to be missed, but to be remembered, who walks away not in retaliation, but in realignment, who doesn't tear down the past, but chooses not to carry it forward. You become a lesson, a mirror, a revelation. You show what strength looks like when it bows to no ego, but remains rooted in virtue. Letting go is not weakness. It's not retreat. It is strength in its most refined form. It is choosing your path when someone else walks off of it. It is understanding that emotional restraint is not suppression. It's wisdom made visible. You are not shrinking. You are not erasing. You are honoring your values, honoring your capacity, honoring your future by refusing to drag what no longer aligns with your direction. People often regret losing the one who didn't fight dirty, the one who didn't weaponize their vulnerability, the one who didn't try to rewrite the story to hurt them back. They regret losing the person who simply stood tall in the moment of letting go and didn't need to be cruel to feel powerful, the one who didn't gossip, didn't lash out, didn't run to be consoled. They remember that. They feel that absence, because what's rare is not the person who explodes, but the one who holds stillness in the storm. They remember the peace you left behind, the clarity, the calm, the quiet confidence that made chaos seem unnecessary. They remember how you didn't try to stay where you weren't being respected. They remember how you didn't turn into someone else to get someone to stay. They remember that you didn't become bitter, you became better. They remember that your silence wasn't weak, it was powerful. They remember how you chose yourself, not in loud defiance, but in silent truth. And that choice shook them more than anything else you could have said or done. They regret the quiet ones, the composed ones, the ones who did not compete for attention but commanded it through presence, the ones who loved fully but didn't cling, the ones who were open but never unguarded, the ones who said everything through their peace and nothing through their anger, because those are the ones you can't replace with noise. Those are the ones you can't forget just by moving on. And that kind of loss, of presence, of peace, of principle, doesn't fade with time. It lingers. It lingers not as guilt, but as a yearning, a recognition that they once had something rare and didn't know how to hold it, a quiet realization that they didn't lose someone desperate to be loved. They lost someone who knew how to love without losing themselves. Chapter 6. Outgrow the version they knew. Time reveals what urgency hides. At the moment of parting, people often believe they understand your value. They think they've seen all of you, your strengths, your flaws, your limits. But what they never expect, what later causes the deepest regret, is when you grow so far beyond who they knew that even your shadow no longer resembles the version they left behind. You become unrecognizable, not in bitterness, but in brilliance, not in retaliation, but in refinement. Your evolution speaks louder than any final conversation ever could. The Stoics believed that the self was not a fixed entity, but a continuous project. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not to keep records, but to keep progress. Each entry was a mirror, held up not to admire, but to examine. Each sentence a stone laid in the foundation of character. He understood that greatness is not achieved in public applause, but in private accountability. The world does not reward those with the loudest intentions. It rewards those who quietly, relentlessly evolve. To outgrow the version they knew is not a strategy of revenge. It's an act of reverence for your potential, your calling, your untapped strength. You are not trying to become someone new to prove anything. You are becoming fully yourself, the self that was buried under compromise, distraction, and doubt. The version that didn't need permission to rise. The version they didn't stay long enough to see. And when you grow like this, consistently, quietly, without announcement or need for applause, you create a gap so wide between who you were and who you are becoming, it becomes impossible for them to cross it. Not because they're not allowed to, but because they no longer recognize the terrain. The old access points have closed. The old version of you is gone. You practice the discipline of growth. You read when others scroll. You study when others sleep. You train while others slack. You choose silence over noise, wisdom over gossip, presence over performance. You pray while others post, reflect while others react. This is not about being better than others. It's about being better than who you were yesterday. And that, in itself, is the most Stoic pursuit. Every day, you make micro decisions that accumulate into massive internal change. You say no to the easy path. You choose structure when the world says chaos is normal. You rewire your thoughts, refine your emotions, re-anchor your values. You build in the dark, not for recognition, but because you've tasted alignment and you're not willing to live without it anymore. And one day, without seeking it, you'll be seen. A name mentioned in a conversation, a post stumbled upon, a presence felt in a room. They'll cross paths with your work, your words, or your energy, and something will shift. They'll pause. They'll feel the echo of who you were, but they'll be unable to grasp who you are now, because you've become a force, a standard, a version of yourself so forged in clarity, so anchored in purpose, that it forces them to reflect, not on what you did to them, but on what they didn't stay to grow with. That realization haunts them more than any argument, because your existence now reflects a level of excellence that reveals their own stagnation. You become not a wound, but a mirror. Not a regret because of drama, but a regret because of distance. Because they now see just how far you've gone and how far they still remain from that level of integrity and growth. Outgrowing the version they knew is not a detour, it's the destination. It's what happens when you choose healing over hostility, vision over validation, mission over memory. You no longer need to revisit who you were for closure. You no longer need to remind them of the role they played. Your life is the reminder. Your clarity is the echo. Your peace is the punctuation mark that ended a story you didn't need to finish with words. And when you reach this point, this still, resolute, elevated self, you'll realize something even more powerful. It was never about them in the first place. It was never about proving yourself to anyone, or being chosen, or convincing someone to stay. Your evolution is not a response to rejection. It's the natural result of alignment. Alignment with your truth, your values, your inner voice that always whispered you were made for more. They just happened to leave at the very moment your wings began to stretch. What they mistook as your final form was merely your foundation. Let that be enough. Let it be sacred. Let it be silent. Not every closing needs a conversation. Not every loss deserves a loud farewell. Sometimes the most powerful response is the quiet commitment to becoming everything they never imagined you could be. Sometimes dignity is louder than dialogue. Sometimes distance is healing, not punishment. Because in the end, regret doesn't stem from your departure. It stems from their inability to see what was unfolding before their eyes. It wasn't that you changed suddenly. It was that they stopped paying attention. They stopped listening. They stopped believing in what you were becoming. They stopped tending to the connection, assuming your light would always stay dim enough to match their comfort. But it didn't. It expanded. It illuminated truths they were not prepared to face. And now, you don't wait for their eyes to open. You don't circle back to be acknowledged. You walk forward in your own light, with your own clarity, toward your own horizon. You do not dim for anyone. You do not pause to be interpreted. It's not their approval you seek anymore. It's your own excellence that you live. It's your own standard that you rise to meet daily with discipline and unwavering intent. That is the Stoic victory. Quiet, enduring, undeniable. Not the kind that gets celebrated in noise, but the kind that lives in presence and echoes in the silence long after you've walked away. It's the kind that leaves others speechless, not because you silenced them, but because your growth outpaced their comprehension. It's the kind that redefines memory into meaning and meaning into movement. The kind that rewrites how they remember you, not in flashes of conflict, but in the calm strength you carried. It's not the legacy of noise, but the legacy of groundedness. This kind of victory doesn't come from proving, it comes from becoming. It doesn't demand recognition, it commands respect without a word. It's felt in the way you carry yourself, in the unwavering nature of your integrity, in the refusal to betray your values just to soothe someone else's discomfort. It's not passive, it's not loud, but it is powerful. It walks into rooms with certainty. It holds gaze without trying. It builds quietly until the structure of your life speaks louder than your defense ever could. You don't win by being louder. You win by being real, unshakably real. You win by being the one who chose discipline over drama, composure over chaos, and truth over temporary validation. And that, in time, becomes the loudest sound of all, the quiet of someone who no longer needs to be heard because their life has become undeniable. Chapter 7. Become the standard. Live with such integrity that you redefine what's possible. There's a rare kind of person who leaves behind not a wound, but a watermark. Someone who sets a new standard by simply living at a higher level of respect, presence, and purpose. They don't need revenge because they are too busy being a revolution. They do not raise their voice, they raise the bar. They do not fight to be remembered. They live in such a way that they are impossible to forget. Their consistency whispers louder than anyone else's noise. And in a world where many try to stand out by shouting, this kind of person becomes magnetic by being still, clear, and rooted. The Stoic doesn't rise to get back at someone. They rise because excellence is the natural expression of their philosophy. Integrity is not a costume they wear, it's their core. They become so consistent in who they are, so anchored in their values, that people realize how low their standards were only after experiencing someone who walks in virtue. This type of person doesn't demand others to rise. They simply embody a level that makes mediocrity uncomfortable and truth unavoidable. Just by existing with discipline and dignity, they change the temperature of every room they enter. Even their absence becomes a form of presence, felt, remembered, and missed. Seneca wrote, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. The one they regret is the one who doesn't waste today, who doesn't wait for clarity to act or for approval to move forward, who lives so clearly and fully that their presence sharpens others, who speaks with such clarity that it exposes every empty word spoken before, who acts with such intentionality that mediocrity feels unbearable by comparison. Their very being becomes a measuring stick for authenticity, for commitment, for presence. And in their wake, others are forced to confront the gap between who they are and who they could be. They regret the person who made excellence look natural, the person whose peace wasn't performative, but a byproduct of alignment, the one who didn't have to raise their tone to be heard, who didn't weaponize silence but turned it into presence, who didn't need closure because their character was already complete. This kind of person becomes a mirror others cannot avoid, reflecting back their own contradictions, unhealed wounds, and disowned potential. And that reflection doesn't fade when you leave. It lingers, becoming a silent teacher in your absence, a lesson not spoken, but lived. Live like that. Be so aligned with your values that those who encounter you must either elevate or exit. Set a standard that reshapes what others believe is possible in loyalty, in love, in leadership. Not through control, but through conduct. Not through declarations, but through demonstration. Your consistency becomes a quiet sermon. Your choices become a compass. Your life becomes a lesson in what it means to live with substance in a world obsessed with surface. The energy you bring becomes a force that shifts expectations, not because you asked, but because you embodied. And in that embodiment, you become a leader without needing a title. This is not about perfection, it's about principle. It's about choosing clarity over chaos, depth over distraction, integrity over impulse. You don't chase validation because you've outgrown the need for external proof. You validate yourself by the way you show up every day, with honesty, with discipline, with purpose. You become the person whose presence alone corrects the room, not by force, but by frequency. You no longer need to convince anyone. You simply live in a way that makes their denial irrelevant. They can pretend not to notice, but they cannot unfeel the shift your presence creates. Be so unwavering in who you are that the only thing left for others to do is adjust. Let your kindness unsettle their cruelty, not by aggression, but by the stark contrast of grace. Let your self-respect reveal their opportunism, not through accusation, but through the clear boundary of your standards. Let your peace highlight their chaos, not to shame, but to illuminate what centeredness truly looks like. You don't call them out, you simply call yourself higher, and that is often more uncomfortable than confrontation. Because what they lose is not just you. It's the rare opportunity to rise with someone already elevated. They lose a mirror, a model, a moment of possible evolution. And in that loss, they often realize too late that the standard you held was the very standard they were once invited to rise to. Your presence challenges more than your words ever could. It speaks in every room you leave, every situation you outgrow, every boundary you reinforce with quiet strength. The echo of your character remains long after your absence, unsettling those who were more comfortable with your silence than with your standard. They won't forget your strength, not because you demanded recognition, but because you lived in a way that made their excuses feel too small. You don't become unforgettable by asking for attention. You become unforgettable by embodying excellence. You don't impress through noise. You inspire through presence. You leave behind not scars, but standards. Standards in how to speak with truth, how to love with dignity, how to lead with humility. And it is that standard, not your silence, not your absence, that haunts those who failed to recognize your value. Because in the end, the legacy of someone who truly lived with integrity is not written in noise, but in the elevated way others are forced to live once they've known you. You don't just leave, you redefine. You don't just walk away, you leave a watermark on the soul. That's what makes you unforgettable. The Stoics believed that suffering is not the end. It is the training. Rejection is not a sign of unworthiness. It is a forge. And those who regret letting you go do so not because you chased them, but because you didn't. Because you turned toward the weight instead of away from it. Because you trained in silence. And because when the dust settled, you were still standing, wiser, sharper, and more composed than ever. Don't rush to be understood. Don't beg to be valued. Let time and truth reveal what noise tries to hide. The rare ones don't just heal. They rise. They lead. They live. Become that. Become the one they didn't know how to keep because they hadn't yet grown enough to hold you. That is the Stoic way. That is your way now.